So thank you for that introduction, and thank
You have
you
to raise that because you're so far up above me that
I have a big mouth. You probably shouldn't give me a microphone.
mouth is closer to that.
All right. Well, thanks for coming back from lunch to hear me talk. I hope I don't disappoint you. Bill wanted me to do a second presentation this morning, but I thought if I'm going to butcher one, I'd rather it be my own presentation. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about phosphorus, and this is a little bit of a continuation from a presentation I gave at the November MABA conference and also at a conference last year. So I wanted to start off a little bit on a broader level on phosphorus and hopefully bring it down, talk a little bit about the total phosphorus versus the environmental risk phosphorus. And then move into talk a little bit about the current restrictions, regulations based on point of use, and talk about that. And then I wanted to end with a little bit of discussion and a quick little view into the inorganic or commercial fertilizer world and relate that back to us in the biosolids world. Oops. So first, just wanted to talk, why are we doing this? Why phosphorus? Well, and where is the problem? Well, first we can look at the Great Lakes watershed, and we'll hear about the Lake Erie impaired designation. Next, we can look at the Mississippi River watershed, and we can then hear about the Gulf of Mexico dead zone. We can move on down to Florida, talk about Lake Okeechobee, and again, we'll hear about nutrient issues in Florida. So there was a speaker who mentioned it more on the international level, more on the local level or the national level. I think some of the drivers are different. For example, I know Australia experienced a problem with availability of phosphorus when their supply got cut off. They just simply could not, due to the export market, obtain phosphorus for a brief period of time. I know Europe has a lot of talk about phosphorus, and their views look slightly different. Europe is a net importer of food, whereas the U.S. is a net exporter of food. So there's some food security issues that Europe has, maintaining an agricultural base that we may not be facing in this country. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Chesapeake Bay. And this headline from 2015 is the most recent I found, so hopefully that's a good sign that maybe things are improving a little bit. So looking at the Chesapeake Bay, because it was an organized program to try to reduce nutrients into a large watershed. There was some question, some talk about taking this model and applying it to other watersheds across the country. I have not seen movement, and as far as I know now, from what I'm hearing, is it is unlikely to follow this blueprint. But in the Chesapeake Bay program, right, the overall goals, let's get rid of 12.5 million pounds of phosphorus and 185 on nitrogen. They broke that into 4 categories. I'm sure most people here are familiar with the wastewater treatment plant category, right? Your effluent limits and the restrictions you see on that. I don't plan on going over that. I plan on talking about the agricultural sector. So taking a quick look at that, we can look at reduction strategies in I broke them into 2 areas. One's just prohibitions, and the other is point of use restrictions or requirements. And if we're going to move into the nutrient world, the new buzzwords in the nutrient world are the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship: right source, right rate, right time, right place. So then I got to thinking, well, what is a nutrient? So I looked up a regulatory definition of nutrient content, and the more I start thinking about this definition, the more I see that it reveals. One thing is nutrient content does break it down into the primary nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So in the Chesapeake Bay strategy and in this reduction, there's no focus on recycling phosphorus. There's no focus on organic matter. There's no focus on micronutrients, only on the macronutrients, and I guess the bay would also focus on sediment. So we talked about the right source of biosolids and nitrogen. It's largely going to contain slowly available nitrogen, low water solubility, low environmental risk. The fluctuations in the nitrogen content and the mineralization rate, both in the product itself and just the weather changes that's going to affect your mineralization rate, does require some management strategies such as the pre-side dress nitrate test and use of starter nitrogen on your fields. Applications of biosolids in their products are typically based on plant available nitrogen, a subset of the total nitrogen. As I mentioned, biosolids also contain other beneficial components such as micronutrients, organic matter, and disease resistance, or drought resistance, and disease resistance. Those are not considered in this plan. So Dr. Charlie White, in his talk I thought was interesting. You've seen more talk on soil health, and the one thing that jumped out at me immediately is you can see where the Chesapeake Bay nutrient plan is not necessarily encompass some of those goals of soil health, and how do we get to that? How would we add organic matter? So the phosphorus challenge, basically biosolids are not in equilibrium between nitrogen and phosphorus. So in a typical plant available nitrogen application rate, we're going to apply more phosphate than what a crop needs for growth. And currently for organic sources, that phosphorus content is measured by total P. And back to the definition is, the definition of nutrient content requires you to report available phosphorus. And sure enough, if we look at inorganic fertilizers, they don't run a total P test. They use a water soluble and a citrate soluble test to determine their phosphorus availability. Now admittedly, those test results are still close to their total phosphorus. So a quick snapshot, just to look at what we're talking about in loading rates, and this is a comparison of biosolids versus a couple of animal manures. You can see the biosolid sources are way above the dotted dashed line, the dotted red line, which is a 3-year crop removal rate. So we're well above that line, particularly in the anaerobic world, where we're eliminating some of accomplishing volatile solids destruction and increasing the phosphorus content. And the solid red line is just kind of estimating a 1-year phosphate removal. And this slide was prepared by Dr. Herschel Elliott out of Penn State University, and he graciously allowed me to use it. But when we start talking about environmental risk of phosphorus, all of a sudden the tables turn. We can look at triple superphosphate on the far left, and moving to the right towards biosolids. So the environmental risk is reversed. Commercial fertilizers, the most water soluble, the most readily movable, and biosolids being the least. And in field experiments, again by Dr. Elliott and others, we do a comparison testing phosphorus runoff on both a low phosphorus containing soil and a high phosphorus containing soil. You can see, and this is only comparing dairy manure with biosolids. You can see the runoff values for dairy manure far higher than biosolids, and as the iron and aluminum concentration increases in biosolids, you can see the lower runoff. And in fact, for the last 3 blocks there, they're all within the same standard deviation, so there's no difference between the control area, which received no additional fertilizer, and the biosolids in regards to phosphorus runoff. So if we go back and use that concept and revise the available phosphorus to consider environmental risk, and develop an equation which is shown here, which is based off the natural logarithm of the water extractable phosphorus in grams per kilogram. This may be hard to believe, but I did not develop this mathematical equation. Dr. Elliott did. And also, during the testing of biosolids and all the risk assessment days, you'll still find in the EPA process design manual a recommendation to use 50% of the total phosphorus as the available phosphorus. So it brings into some question of why exactly are we using total phosphorus to describe our phosphorus applications. So we have proposed this Synagro with MAMWA, Maryland Association of Municipal Wastewater Agencies. I have proposed this to both the MDE and MDA for consideration. So I did some testing. These are not scientific. These were spot checks, various treatment processes around to look at the water extractable phosphorus and plug it into the equation to see what the available phosphate might look like in those sources. I apologize, I did not get the results back from some anaerobic digestion sources to include in the slide, so I left it at 0. But that really is null for a data set. So when we look at lime stabilization, we're running around an average of 54% availability. Also see that with compost. The compost samples were not from this region, were from facilities across the country. And they were merchant facilities, so I don't know that the individual plants, whether or not they're using ENR or were using iron chloride in their precipitation process. So I suspect they were not. So this availability may be significantly lower for areas composting biosolids enhanced with ferric chloride. And then again, the heat-dried pellets, looking at 20 to 40% availability. So, excuse me, revisiting that slide I had up earlier, if we start looking at the availability of phosphorus and put the same information and kept the 3-year and 1-year lines, and you can start to see at 75 or 50% or 25% that many of the sources are now below the 3-year phosphorus removal rate. So the use of the web testing to determine phosphorus availability would only impact how you calculate available P. It still would not replace any of the other nutrient management requirements, such as running a soil test to determine your phosphorus level. Would not take the place of running any of the indices. You'd still use the indices. It would just be affecting the amount you report as total phosphorus. In a broader context, we need to start considering how we're going to get there. We need some bridges, certainly. I'll show later in the slide with the time frames in front of us. We're not going to employ 100% phosphorus removal technologies by the year 2020, or certainly by the year 2022, which are the goals in the Chesapeake Bay plan. So that was our phosphorus ask that we used, brought together research information and put it into a proposal for consideration. The other speakers, a couple of them caught my attention. One of them in the phosphorus removal technology, when they mentioned about how you want to strip the phosphorus out and how you want to recover it. And what I heard pretty loud and clear was, you got to do it before you add iron chloride. And why is that? Well, that iron chloride is why the phosphate's largely not going to be, it's not an environmental risk when we put it out in the field. It is too tightly held and bound up, and likely also in various mineralogical forms. And not all phosphorus mineralogical forms are good fertilizers. So changing gears a little bit, I went back in time to try to show, what do these new nutrient management restrictions mean? What is different over time? So I took a quick snapshot, just went back and found the 1997-98 Pennsylvania Agronomy Guide, and I looked up their ratings on soil test levels for low, optimum, and high, and have them stated here. And then I checked the 2016-17 agronomy guide, and you can see the new levels that they have there. So over time, just the change in the category levels causes quite a bit of challenge to us, with the new high area being limited to 60 ppms. That is often a trigger point for many of the indices and considerations for applying organic fertilizers. During that time period, we also saw nitrogen recommendations lower from 1.1 to 1 pound per bushel yield. So again, I thought I'd try to just put that into some perspective, the phosphorus change in Pennsylvania in the soil test categories. So picked a 3 dry ton rate at varying phosphate concentrations and said this is how many pounds per acre of total phosphorus we'd be applying to the soil. And you can see one application would be up to, at best, would be at the high level, and most of them being vastly above the high level. Now, in fairness, or what you have to understand is just because you apply this rate of total phosphate, you will not see this rate in the Mehlich 3 soil test. The Mehlich 3 soil test rates will not rise that quickly, and that will has to do with the soil interactions of the material. But I just wanted to give a comparison so you can see the size of the challenge. So as nutrient prescriptions become more precise, it's going to more favor blended inorganic or commercial fertilizers. So we look a little bit at right time. So, you know, I heard about the New York facility, Casella, talking about storing the material through the winter time and holding it for 6 months until the fields were available. Well, there are also other nutrient management considerations that may require you to consider storage or delaying your application or preventing you from going out on a regular basis, even when the weather's good. One example of that program is the cover crop program in Maryland, which is part of the Chesapeake Bay cleanup plan to meet their goals. And Maryland is currently spending $22.5 million annually to pay farmers to plant this cover crop. And they're reimbursing at rates of up to $75 per acre. If you want to use biosolids on this farm, you're still required to plant the cover crop. However, they will no longer be eligible to receive funding for the cover crop. So another way of looking at it as if you want to apply in the fall, you're automatically increasing your cost for a smaller application of up to $75 an acre. Virginia has a tax credit program that pays you up to $25 an acre, and I did not find a program for Pennsylvania. All these states are eligible for federal EQIP program, and for the first time in Ohio, in a farm in the EQIP program, because the phosphorus application would exceed the 3-year phosphate removal rate, they prohibited biosolids from being applied. Interestingly, though, the farm could still receive dairy manure, which was the local source of manure, because it's typically liquid, and you can revise your liquid rates down a little bit, stay at the 3-year phosphorus removal rate, and apply the material. However, environmentally speaking, that represents a much higher risk than it would have been to apply the biosolids. So the index in Maryland also changed over time. So from 2000 to arguably 2016, we're under the phosphorus site index, and starting 2016, I guess we moved to the phosphorus management tool. The full implementation of that will occur over the up to 2020 unless there's some delays. So the big change is under the old index, a low score meant you could do a nitrogen-based application. The new index means the low score means you can only do a 3-year crop removal phosphate application. As far as the calculations, they did include more tools that will get you to the low category in Maryland. However, the low category is the big challenge, the 3-year phosphate removal, which for many generators will be below the equipment capability of spreading that low of a rate. Other changes, application rates are becoming more prescriptive. And here's an example I pulled out of the Nutrient Management Manual, just showing for fescue, less than 25% legumes, yield goal 5 ton per acre. And the leftmost column is showing the nitrogen requirement, the top column being the total nitrogen needed. And then the next 4 columns are phosphorus, phosphate recommendations for low, medium, optimum, and excessive categories. But the thing I wanted to show was what the recommendation now is to only put down part of that nitrogen at one time. And you see, in this case, is that top dress at green up. So that'd lower your rate to 100 tons. So building a biosolids program, green up of hay, is going to be, competing with the corn window. So you're going to be running on corn crop, and now is when they also want you to run the hay crop. And then the subsequent applications after first harvest and in the fall start dropping down and questioning the ability of being able to apply that rate of biosolids with the equipment. Another area for nutrient management to look at from an agricultural perspective is nutrient buffers. So arguably there's a 35-foot vegetative buffer setback for commercial fertilizer, but it's not a hard and fast rule. There is a requirement to not apply on impermeable surfaces, and if you do so, you have to sweep the impermeable surfaces. To jump over to the biosolids world, and we see these buffers of streams, property lines, wells, outcrops, roads, houses, water table, etc. So this is area where we're prohibited, but these are still areas that are farmed. They're still receiving commercial fertilizer, they're still receiving all the agricultural prescriptive activities, but now you came in and used biosolids and you left, it's like a piece of Swiss cheese. Now you cut out these little holes where you could not apply fertilizer, and that brings up a new challenge for the farmer. Now how does this farmer manage his site to keep the buffer soils at the same productivity level of the biosolids area, right? He doesn't want to see his corn yield drop down to 50 bushel an acre or something in the buffer zone. And that's going to increase his costs. So I hear a lot of people trying to recapture costs of biosolids. This is one of the challenges. He's going to spend more to fertilize those small buffer areas than he would be if he just started off with commercial fertilizer in the first place. So the last phase of this is I just wanted to move into a little bit of the eyes of the commercial fertilizer industry. And a headline recently caught my attention. They built a new nitrogen fertilizer plant in Iowa, which is just opening. And its projected production will be 1.5 to 2.0 million metric tons of production. So when we're looking at the pricing structure of commercial fertilizers, or just understand the economy of scales they have going on. This is producing a pretty pure and pretty consistent nitrogen product, and they produce a lot of it to spread tons out. So just give a couple pictures. This is a close-up of ammonium sulfate, diammonium phosphate, potash, and then some fertilizer properties. So you start looking at this, a couple things jump out. These are what those guys are looking at and measuring and concerned about in their materials. One thing caught my mind, if you look at the median diameter in inches, and you see how close all the various fertilizer products are to that. So the advantage of that means that in the same spreader you can mix these together and you're going to get a very similar spread pattern regardless of how you mix the material. And there also is a lot of attention paid to the bulk density, so the ability of this material to survive handling, not getting crushed, not creating dust, etc., etc. And that's what they're looking. I think the chart to me demonstrated they can blend these products now without ever touching the ground. I can come with a very precise application rate in mind, and they can blend the products to pretty much meet that rate and then go out and deliver and spread to the field in one pass. Yesterday, we heard a gentleman talk about the small class A facilities, and he mentioned about making use of the local equipment, and I think I heard it again today up in New England about a loaner spreader. So this is a picture of a spinner spreader, the delivery section. This is pretty much what all the technology for delivering commercial fertilizer is based upon, whether it's a large one like pictured here, or a small one, or even a handheld one that you can just spin out your commercial fertilizer. So your product, unless you want to get into equipment manufacturing, and this is the market you want to get into, you have to understand how the material is going to be spread, and will your product fit into that application and use requirement. Early on with the George's Old Town blend, some of the first production runs we made, one of the problems is the material looks a lot like a mulch. And you take a product that's a fertilizer, but you deliver it to customers who are accustomed to seeing that type of product and say it's a mulch. So what happened in some of the bag deliveries were they used it like a mulch. So they took basically bags of fertilizer and put it around a bush like a mulch and burned and killed the bush. Really hard to get repeat customers if they've killed their bushes. But it brought to my mind the importance of you have to educate your consumers. If your product is going out into the consumer world, looks like a mulch, maybe smells like a mulch, they're going to use it like a mulch unless you can demonstrate otherwise. The label in the bag isn't going to change their education. So that's really it.
You want to take questions, or are you
I'm willing to
absolutely
take
done?
questions. I saw like 2 minutes yet, right? So
Are we following the clock?
you said we were getting out of here at 4 o'clock.